So welcome to the next session. And in this session, you have the chance to meet some of the WCA staff and WCA board members. So please do ask your questions, and we'll get to the questions as you ask them. So first, I'd like to introduce Vincent Lefebvre. Vincent is one of our co-chairmen and has been a co-chairman for a couple of years. He is the founder and CEO of Seminu, which is an innovative, I don't know if I can still call you a startup, Vincent, but anyway, a fairly young company in France that's expanding elsewhere in Europe. And it has an innovative business model, and perhaps we'll get into that if we talk about aspects of sustainability that refer to logistics, which is something that you've changed a lot. And secondly, I'd like to introduce you to Roland van Wijnen. And Roland is the CEO of PPC, the largest cement maker in South Africa, and I guess indeed in Southern Africa. So Roland has been a director of WCA this year, since the General Assembly last year. And has a very interesting role in view of the potential growth that we're going to see in Africa over the next few years, in contrast to many other parts of the world. And Frank Liu is the director of WCA in China. He looks after the China office, the Beijing office. And Frank has got his fingers in all parts of the Chinese industry, and is going to kick us off today by just telling us a little bit about what's happening in China at the moment and how China has recovered from COVID and what the prospects are for the next few years. Frank, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Ian. Just a brief introduction about China and Chinese cement industry. And in 2020, last year, the total production and consumption is around 2.1 billion tons. And that is around 0.8% increase compared with 2019. That a little bit surprised to most of the industry guys, because we all don't know that the last year is a big challenger because of the virus. And also in 2020, there are new capacity put into operation, which around 35 million tons. And in this year, estimated in China, there are new production line with about 49 million tons new capacity will put into operations, which is huge. And especially in China, in fact, there are the policy that is limited to have a new capacity unless you buy the old disadvantaged production lines capacity and then set up the new capacity with the 14% to 30% reduce the capacity in new place. But even that, there are a lot of new investors, and also there are a lot of the big cement company. They buy the quota from north of China, and then they set new production line with most advanced technology in south of China. So that make the Chinese cement industry, the layout totally different than before. Because in north of China, normally the running factor is just something like 7 to 8 months. But go to south of China, it will be 60 days per year, a food season could be operated. So that is a big challenger for the industry. But in 2020, the industry, cement industry, total profit is still in a high level, which is around something like 18 billion RMB. It's around 2.5 yeah,
$2 billion.
25 something, 2.5 billion, yeah, US dollars, yeah, in total, which is around top 1 to top 2 among the 42 heavy industries in China. So that means this industry in China become most profitable industry. That is, is really a strange case happened. Okay.
Absolutely.
In 2020, the import is around 25 million tons clinker from Southeast Asia, from Korea, from Japan to east coast of China. On the other side, there are more and more cement company, they make some modification and the AI technology applied in those plants, especially in new plant. Most of the new cement plant, the manpower is from 200 down to 60 people. So that is a big difference. And also the environmental issues, the NOx. The Chinese, the NOx emission is around 400 milligram, but in some province, they have a local standard. So the target is less than 100 milligram. So that means more and more modification, upgrading happened in Chinese cement industry, especially AI technology, the NOx, and also some emissions for the cement production lines. In this year, especially in first quarters, the Chinese cement industry also shows very profitable trend. And the capacity and production in first quarter is a little bit higher than previous years. This year compared with last year, the infrastructure consumed will be more than last year because most of the new projects, they speed up to construction. So that is what happened in China. But on the other side, the cement price in southeast of China is something like 400 to 500 RMB. But in some province, especially in southwest of China, in Guizhou province, is something like 200 RMB. In Yunnan province is go down from 400 last year, go down to 240 to 220. And this year, a lot of people estimated in Guangxi province. It's also southwest of China. It could be which nearby, the neighborhood of the above two provinces could be go down to around 250 RMB per ton. So that means this year the cement price in some region will be some big change, but some other regions, especially in east coast of China, it will be keep in middle and high level, like 400 RMB to 500 RMB. So that is some general information. One more information, I want to share with yours that from the 3 years, if you want to buy the quota, the old production line, shut down the old production line, build a new production line, the quota of the capacity is something like 30 RMB. But the end of last year is rise up to 150, and now in this season, something like 170 RMB. So it means a lot of investors, including the big cement company, they even want to pay more to buy the quota and build the most advanced new production line in China.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is some general information in China.
Okay, well, thank you, Frank. It's a huge market, and it's interesting for the rest of us to follow what's going on. But maybe I can also turn to Roland and Vincent and just ask what's happening in your part of the world. Roland, do you want to tell us what's going on in South Africa and Africa more generally?
Absolutely, Ian. Thanks, and thanks for having me. It's an interesting question, actually, when you talk South Africa or Africa. You know, Africa comprises, what is it, more than 50 countries. Just by the way, sort of a fun fact that I came across recently that I didn't realize. If you travel north to south through the continent, you cover more than 7,000 kilometers. If you cover east to west, it's about the same 7,000 kilometers. So I was never aware that north to south, east to west is about the same distance in Africa. A continent that has, in all these countries, one thing in common, and that is across the board, you will see growth. Growth in population, current population, probably about 1.3 billion people across the continent. And of course, a growth in cement consumption as infrastructure is lacking throughout the continent. Now, if you zoom into particular countries, obviously starting all the way in the south, in South Africa, you know, one of the most developed countries in the continent, which is visible in the fact that it is one of the few countries where cement consumption per capita is at levels, you know, above 150 to 200, which is normally well below in many of the other countries, right? Last year, of course, similar to what Frank mentioned, you know, you can't go around 2020 without speaking about COVID. The COVID lockdown had a severe impact on the industry. However, the last months of 2020, actually starting in the second half of the calendar year, we saw a quite stark increase in the cement sales volumes. And that was partially recovery from the lockdown. But we've also seen that the grants that were supplied by the government into society have been used for various home improvements. Obviously, you know, the severity of the lockdown and the global pandemic shows once more the need for good housing solutions. So we saw quite an increase in the amount of construction going on in housing as well as in home improvement. The second element that has helped is the low interest rate environment. South African government lowered the interest rates, and we've definitely seen the positive impact from that. And if we look forward, what we see happening or start to see happening is an increase in infrastructure spend, which will obviously help the cement consumption as well. And that is on the back of the fact that the South African economy is doing and recovering better than expected. Thanks to our colleague Frank and his colleagues in China, the demand for commodities is quite significant. And of course, South Africa as a commodity exporter benefits from that. That does come from our cement industry because all these vessels that bring the iron ore to China have to bring something back. And unfortunately, sometimes they bring back cement and other materials out of countries where we believe they should keep the cement in their own markets. Especially because in South Africa, we have elements that Vincent is very familiar with, carbon taxation, and we are therefore, you know, pleading for level playing fields when it comes to imports versus local production. Now, if you look at some of the other countries in Africa, as I said, growth is the sort of combining factor. Every country has slightly different dynamics, though. If you take a country, you know, as big as the DRC, where you travel your cement over hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers, by truck, by barge, by truck, by motorbike, to bring it into the deep interior. That's of course a completely different setup as to South Africa, as an example. Another country that has dealt last year very well with the demand side of cement is Rwanda, a very small country in the middle of the continent. And there the government boosted a program to build schools. So if you actually look at our cement sales volumes in that country, you see an uptick despite the fact that we had the COVID impact. So it's a bit a different scenario in different countries. We see longer term outlook, Eastern African countries as very promising. Ethiopia has a promising underlying economic factors. If you look at the fixed capital formation, you see that Ethiopia is trending in the right direction. We are very positive as well on a country like Zimbabwe, where a lot of people frown a little bit. Obviously, Zimbabwe has its economic challenges, and we do have challenges as well. But in terms of cement consumption and construction, it has been very solid, and we see that continuing in the years to come as well. Now, if you see what is happening in the markets in general, you do see growth, and therewith, we have investors looking at potential new capacity. On the other hand, investing in many of the countries in the continent of Africa comes at a certain risk. So it is probably not like what Frank said, that people are lining up to build new factories here and there. There has been factories built. There are many countries where the supply demand is currently slightly on the oversupply side. So then you would be hedging on the growth that comes into the future. In terms of the market itself, you have a few players like ourselves that have presence in multiple African countries. Then obviously you've got some of the traditional international players out of Europe, and you have more and more interest from the Chinese industry as well to invest in Africa. So I think the coming years is going to be an interesting dynamics in the M&A front to see how this landscape will evolve. And that, of course, on the back of the drive for us as well, to make sure that whatever is going to be constructed in Africa is as far as possible completely up to scratch with developments that we see in China and in Europe and in the United States, Canada, when it comes to carbon reduction. So there, my personal, wish almost would be, can we make a leapfrog in the African continent the same way as it has been done in the mobile industry or in the banking industry, that you move immediately to a next level of technology and don't go through the same learning curve as other countries have had to go through. But that we'll see. A lot is still in the cards for the years to come. I'll leave it there for now, Ian.
Okay, thank you, Roland. So I think in Africa, as you say, the picture varies quite a lot, but the long-term trend, of course, is growth. So Vincent, if we turn to Europe, then I think we'd be hard pressed to say the long-term trend was growth. But I think in the case of Europe, though, we would really hope to see some leadership in terms of innovation, and in particular in terms of sustainability related innovation, given how much it's been on the agenda of companies and countries in Europe. What do you see in the European market? Maybe you could just give us a very quick sketch of what you think is happening generally in the markets, and then what is happening in terms of companies really embracing low carbon technologies.
Well, Europe is enjoying a very strong economic rebound after the 2020 pandemic. And basically all the economic sectors around construction, well-being, all which is linked with the house, is booming. So cement is enjoying a very good momentum. And on the other way, there is a huge focus on CO2 reduction, on CO2 concern within the whole economy. just to make an example, the car industry is facing the phasing out of all the internal combustion engine by 2035. It's 15 years from today. So it's a much bigger revolution than the one we can imagine regarding CO2 in the cement. I believe that all the big shocks are ahead. Just to say that the CO2 price, you know that in Europe, it's a market with supply demand, and the CO2 hit the 50 euro price a few weeks ago and still rising. So it's time to see real big change. And I think that, and it comes to sustainable logistics, the combination of greener technology into the clinker industry and sustainable logistics are opening the way to new business model, as we have forecast many years ago and which is occurring now. We know that to reduce CO2, you have basically, for me, 3 ways. First is energy efficiency of the clinker production. And for so, you have to have best available technology plants. And you don't have much best available technology plants in Europe, because the last ones have been built, at least in Western Europe, 30 to 40 years ago, when China is scratching plants of 15 years ago and saying that they are obsolete. So you see the difference. So if you look at the map and you say where are the most efficient, energy efficient plant, you have it along the Med, in Turkey, for example, you have very recent and very efficient plants. And if these plants are producing very good quality clinker, you can dilute it much more with a low clinker factor. And that's what is our business model, because if you look at it globally, when you look at the CO2 by transportation, mass transportation like vessel, and in our case, we move the clinker from the port of entry to our grinding station by train in container. I just give one number in terms of CO2 per ton of cement. We emit 30 kilo of CO2 per ton of cement, transporting the clinker from the Eastern Med to France, and then by train to our grinding station, right? 30 kilo, which is not much. The last mile, the CO2 to transport the cement by truck to our customers, it's between 30 and 45 kilo per ton of cement. Because truck is the less CO2 efficient mode of transportation. And that's why we have think to put our grinding station the closest to the center of consumption and bring the raw material on the most CO2 efficient way. And this changed completely the way of thinking. There is a classical way of thinking that very big cement plant, integrated cement plants, are seldom near the consumption centers, very far, and they ship a lot of cement very long away by truck, which is a less efficient way of reaching the customer. So when you really make your fully scope 3, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 global balance of CO2, and look to the integrated supply chain, and look at new sustainable means of reaching with the lowest CO2 your customer, then there is a big changes of paradigm. So that's what we are seeing currently in France, and also in France and Europe, and also a race with new cements and new standardization of cement, including the famous calcined clay, activated clay, in order to reduce very quickly the clinker factor. And as Roland said, we have seen in Africa that they are jumping stage. They jump the fixed line in the phone industry directly to the mobile. And in Africa, they are pioneers in calcined clay. So I really believe that Africa can be one step forward and go directly also to less CO2 intensive cements. And in Europe, we are helped by, I would say, legislation, the famous ETS, the CO2 trading scheme. But maybe Africa is helped because they have not so many places with limestone, and they will jump with new cements very quickly.
No, that's an interesting point, Vincent. I think also your point about logistics. You know, it's when we talk about emissions from cement, we're generally talking about scope 1, sometimes scope 1 and scope 2. And because scope 3 is relatively small by comparison, we don't much talk about scope 3. But as we reduce the emissions from cement, then scope 3 is going to become more and more significant. So I think that's a very interesting point. We have a question from Anne de Corkelet. And some time ago, Anne and Vincent and I did a podcast on the ETS scheme. Now, she'd like to ask you a question, Frank, but maybe you might give some context for this first, Vincent. So Anne asks, Frank, China's about to implement the ETS, the emission trading scheme, and she thinks it's based on the European scheme, and she wants to know, you know, given that there are some inconsistencies of the European scheme with free allowances, do you know if the Chinese scheme will include free allowances? So, Frank, let me give you a second to think about that, because maybe I can just get Vincent to explain a little bit about the free allowances first in Europe, so that people can understand the context there. So, Vincent, could you explain the free allowances briefly, and then also what the current situation, the latest situation is?
Okay, so it's we are in just the middle of a big transition. I have been, I would say, discussing with all the European commissioners during the last 6 to 8 months. We have changed to a new system of ETS entering into force 1st of January 21, where there is still a combination between sectors who have to pay from the very first ton their CO2 emission, mainly the energy industry. So electricity is fully engaged into decarbonation, and other sectors who have still free quota given by the European Union based on a benchmark, one of which is the cement industry, and alongside the steel industry and others. And we have to look frankly at the situation. This has not helped to curve down the CO2. So there is a lot of discussion to cut all these free allowances, so that the principle, the good principle that polluter pay from the first ton. So at 50 euro per ton, you are highly incentivized to decarbonize your production. But you have to protect this with what we call a carbon border adjustment mechanism, in order to have not to have unfair competition with importers. I am fully in favor of the carbon adjustment mechanism, because as my supply chain, even if it's outside of Europe, is more CO2 conscious than the big majority of the old cement plants in Europe, I will be one winner. And that's only competition will lead to lower CO2 emissions. So the last thing about the European Union is that they will stop within 2 to 3 years free allowance in parallel of putting a carbon adjustment mechanism in order to have a level playing field with European Union producers and outside European Union producers.
Is that decided, Vincent, or is it still being discussed?
It's not decided, but all the people, the deciders I speak with are very clear on their mind. But it's quite a long process.
Yeah,
but
I can imagine.
There is no other way because free quota plus a carbon adjustment mechanism will be against the World Trade Organization rules. So it's a logic situation, the logic next step of the carbon mechanism.
Okay, thank you. So Frank, coming to the Chinese situation, do you know, is cement included in the first step of the ETS? I thought it was limited to the power industry.
That is really a good question. You know, we have 7 ETS market in China, and come to the cement sectors, we are not really finalized how to calculate the base carbon quotas. It's based on the total capacity of some year, or is based on per unit. So there's an argument. So we some of the guys they support to calculate based on the real production, not capacity, in some years. Take example 2019 or 2020. But some others they said it's better to based on the capacity. But in China, you know, the area is so large. Some area is very sensitive area. So some area is non-sensitive area. So the local government in each province, they have their own control target. So that is really a big challenger for the government and also for cement association, especially the beginning, how to calculate, how to give the base quota for each companies. So we are under the process. We are not finalized on that, but ETS for sure in China, the government, especially the central government, push all of the heavy industry, including steel, alumina, cement, power plant. They have to set up the regulations, and then all of the company should follow up. So that is situations. I think maybe I'm not. To be honest, personally, I don't believe the end of the year we can finalize, especially in cement industry. But I learned that China Cement Association, they are working on that.
Right. So I think
just one comment about that. I am absolutely convinced that there is a good momentum between, I would say, pushing forward the new legislation in the European Union, in China, and the US. And if these 3 big economic zones are converging towards an ambitious ETS, then the rest of the world will follow. The 3 big economic entities having a compatible scheme and ambitious one will be of a formidable power for the sake of the world.
Yeah, I think just to clarify on Anne's question about the ETS design, though, I think at the moment the national ETS is only applied to power plants, and certainly the Chinese authorities have studied the European experience very carefully to try and avoid the same problems. So I don't think they've quite resolved this issue yet, Anne, but I think they are doing their best to avoid repeating the mistakes of the European scheme. So maybe I'll move on. Sorry.
Because all the point is about carbon leakage, right? And that's if there will be a carbon border adjustment mechanism built in Europe in the next 2 years, it will also protect the power industry, because there is leakage.
Yes,
there is
sure.
exports of electricity done with coal from Ukraine, Belarus, and Morocco towards the European Union, which is completely, it's against every kind of logic. All the electricity should be decarbonized either with solar or nuclear, but not allowing fully carbonized carbon leakage on the borders.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. And this is a question from Julian Ray. And it's a difficult question, Roland, so I thought we could ask you this question. He says, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Can I ask about the role of the WCA board in terms of gathering local insights and expertise from your respective regions? And how does this inform WCA's strategy and filter down to the membership, particularly in areas like sustainability, where challenges and opportunities vary significantly with geography? Roland, would you like to give it a shot?
As a board member, I could refer that easily. I could refer this to the CEO of the WCA. But as you gather your thoughts, Ian, to complement what I'm going to say, one of the reasons for us to join WCA was exactly to gather insights from other companies that are dealing with the same topics in different environments. So, for example, where we can learn a lot is the experiences that Vincent is just talking about in Europe, because we interact with governments as well. So we obviously try to pass some of the learnings, and the WCA offers a platform through that, not just at the board level, also at the committee levels. I think one element of work at WCA that has given us a lot of insights already is the Pegasus benchmark project. Obviously, we have 11 integrated clinker factories, but if you can compare yourselves to 250 or 300 or more, you start to gain insights, you start to connect to people. We have within PPC adopted the philosophy that we would like to be a fast follower, taking cognizance of the fact that we will not be the leading innovator given our size, but we do want to have our ears very close to the ground. And WCA gives that platform of knowledge sharing. Now, towards policy and policymakers, I think it is the responsibility of each of the members in their region to bring home some of the common messages that we have. And as you might want to add something to this, if not already done during the day, Ian, is how can we position WCA as a common view towards, for example, the upcoming COP meetings that will take place.
Okay, thank you, Roland. So Julian, thank you for this question. The way that we really address this issue is through the committees. So we have a number of committees that look at different issues, primarily technology and sustainability issues. There's a steering team, and then we underneath that look at products. So this covers cement and concrete and material quality. We look at automation and industry 4.0. We look at reducing carbon footprint. We look at safety and health. So we have this committee structure, and in addition, we have a committee that looks at performance, which is tied into the Pegasus project that Roland mentioned. And so these committees are composed of members who come from around the world, and they're also connected to a wider network of members, and they have joint meetings with these networks and the networks are populated by technical specialists in safety and production in different areas. So we have a structure of engaging the membership through the networks and the committees to make sure that we're addressing the key issues that are being faced by the individual members. And to your last point about the challenges and opportunities vary significantly with geography, this is true in many ways. Of course, we also face a common challenge, which we've talked about a great deal already today, and that's the challenge of decarbonizing the industry. And that challenge is the same across the world. The solution is not necessarily the same. There'll be many components in this solution, and those components will vary. So one of the things that we've seen changing, and maybe we should wrap this up in the next few minutes, but I don't know, Frank, if I could just come back to you with another question on China and specifically on decarbonization. So President Xi Jinping set the target of decarbonizing the whole economy by 2060, and I think from talking to people in the cement industry, you know, there's a feeling that actually the target has to be met earlier than that for the industry, at least. What have you seen in terms of concrete steps forward so far? Have there been changes in the behavior of the industry since President Xi's announcement?
Yes, but to be honest, most of the larger companies, they start to research and study how to do, how to work, what is the timeline. So I see some other the international company, they already make some public announcement on some sectors, but in China, most of the company, they are internally discussing and they are looking for and gathering the information from the outside, but not make officially announcement. But to be honest, and some company like the leading company like Anhui Quant, like CNBM, a couple of years ago, they start to work for some typical plant, and then they make a lot of effort already. So, but generally speaking, the industry not yet, and the leading company, they are not finalize the action plan.
In talking to the leading companies, something that struck me was the sense of urgency that they needed to solve this problem. So I think, you know, that seemed to be a little different perhaps from the attitudes that we see in the developed world, where it's, you know, tell us what the rules are and we'll figure out how to play. I think in China, you know, there's a history of the government setting policy goals, and if the policies don't meet those goals, the policies are adjusted. So I think people have a habit of looking at the goals and figuring out, well, the government will tweak things until we get there, so we better figure out how to get there. So I was very encouraged by what people have been saying in the last few months in China. You are right,
Ian, that this is a political decision made by our leaders of China. So there are not room and space for us to discuss what is the figure and what is negotiate how long it will take. So this, I also believe that very soon we will, not only cement industry but all the others, we will make the internal our independent decision and also the industry decision of each.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I see that we have reached our appointed time. So I want to thank all of you for participating in the panel. Roland, Vincent, Frank, many thanks. Good to see you all again. And thank you to all who participated.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.